What is going on, everybody? I am back today to do part 2 of a video that I did a little while ago that got quite a bit of interaction and people seem to really enjoy it. So I thought I would do a second installment, and that is talking about sad films and emotional movies and movies that move you to tears. The first video I made, I talked about a lot of movies that really moved me emotionally and that made me cry, and I talked about it in that video, but I always like it when I watch a movie and it moves me to tears, or it moves me significantly emotionally, because it's awesome to have art that can connect with you in that type of a way that it can move you emotionally. And so I thought it would be fun to do a second installment of that video series and talk about some more movies that I think are incredibly emotional or sad or moving. So without further ado, let's get into it right now. So first up is going to be the film Marriage Story from director Noah Baumbach. I'm a huge Noah Baumbach fan. I love him quite a bit. I've watched most of the films in his catalog, and I would say Marriage Story is probably the movie in his catalog that moved me the most. I've discussed it on my YouTube before, but my parents went through a really awful divorce, and it was a very difficult circumstance to go through, and it was really hard to watch. Marriage Story is a film about a couple going through a divorce, and it looks at divorce through a really unique lens because it starts off the film with Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver's characters still in love and still connected, and then we see them start to fall apart, and we see everything that goes on when it comes to their separation and the joint custody of their child, where neither one of them initially wants to get lawyers involved, and then they decide to. We see how these lawyers work and operate and manipulate their clients to try to get more for them without necessarily letting the client realize what that's going to do to damage the relationship, even if they're separated. And it's a really fascinating movie, and it's heartbreaking. And the third act has a sequence where Adam Driver's reading this letter that is like one of the most emotionally impactful scenes I've ever watched in a movie. I just remember I got to see this in the theater before it came to Netflix, and it just broke me in the theater. There's also a really beautiful scene where Adam Driver sings one of the songs from Stephen Sondheim's Company, and it's a really amazing sequence. And him and Scarlett Johansson just really have amazing chemistry in the movie, and their dialogue sequences together are just incredible. And it's a movie that moved me a lot. I loved it when I saw it, and I always look forward to revisiting it whenever I get the chance. Next is the Spike Jonze film Her. I actually recently mentioned this in my Valentine's Day video, and this is a movie that isn't necessarily depressing or sad through the entire runtime of the film, but I think it really captures that feeling of loneliness and emptiness that so many people feel, and that longing for connection. And there are really beautiful, tender, compassionate, romantic moments that make you feel warm while you're watching it, or that make you feel comforted. But there's so many moments that are just emotionally crushing and realistic when it comes to a relationship ending and trying to move on and not feeling like you're ever going to find the person that's for you. And Spike Jonze just captures the idea of romantic relationship in a way that feels so realistic and so palpable. And I just love this movie a lot. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. If I was making a top 20 films of all time list, Her would definitely end up there. It's a movie I've revisited more than a lot of movies I talk about frequently. And there's just something about it that constantly draws me back in. And it's a beautiful, emotionally moving movie that if you've never seen before, I'd recommend checking out. Next is a very recent film, and that's the 2022 film The Quiet Girl. This movie instantly became one of my favorite films of all time the first time I watched it. I've since seen it 3 more times, and every time I watch it, I find something new to appreciate about it. This is another movie where the entire film isn't somber, but the reality of the situation is incredibly depressing. You have this young girl who is being raised in a large family where her dad is constantly not home, and it's implied that he's having an affair on his wife while she's pregnant. And the mother does not do the greatest job taking care of each child individually because she's so swamped just trying to live day to day. They don't think that they can take care of their daughter, and so they send this young girl off to live with distant family members. And she, for the first time in her life, gets to experience these people who genuinely love her and care for her just because she exists. And there's more layered elements to the film, and there's plot devices that are revealed that make the situation even more emotionally devastating. But the movie is so quiet in its interactions between characters and the way characters look at each other, or like have a touch on the shoulder, or just these intimate moments. Like there's a scene where the female relative bathes the young girl for the first time, and there's just this like feeling from her of compassion and sadness that she's not being taken care of by her actual family. And I think there's so much in this movie that people will be able to relate to and that will emotionally resonate with anyone who watches this movie. And it's a film I have not stopped thinking about since I watched it the first time. It's one of my favorite films of the decade so far, and if you haven't seen it, I've praised it a million times, but you need to watch it. Next is the Sean Baker film, The Florida Project. The last 10 minutes of this movie made me cry something awful, like ugly cry, to where I couldn't even do anything after the movie was over because I was so emotionally devastated. Sean Baker is one of those directors who consistently impresses me because of the authenticity and the emotion that he's able to capture in his films. For those of you who aren't aware, Sean Baker has made movies like Tangerine, Red Rocket, and Starlet, and they're often capturing people who live lower income areas. They capture these people who live in parts of the country where there's a lot of stereotypes towards those people, and just there's a way that the general public feels about these people. And what's so interesting about the Florida Project is it's about a single mother who lives at a hotel where the hotel ownership realizes that most of the people who live there can't afford an apartment, and so they just pay the very cheap price to live at the hotel, and the only requirement is they can't stay there for, I think it's more than like 30 or 60 days without moving a room, so they have to hop room to room. We see this mother who is trying her best to take care of her daughter, but isn't necessarily the best person and doesn't necessarily make the best decisions for her daughter. And that's where the movie is really hard hitting. Most of the film is through the lens of the child, which makes it really hard to watch because you're seeing this child who has this optimism and hope for life and just wants normalcy, but she can't get it because it's just not in the cards for her because of her mother. And it's just really beautiful and poignant and well shot and well directed. Willem Dafoe is in the movie, gives a brilliant performance as per usual, and it's one of my favorite films in A24's catalog, and one that definitely breaks me every time I revisit. Up next is going to be the first installment in the Three Colors trilogy, Blue, directed by Krzysztof Kieslowski. This movie is gut-wrenching in a way that's really hard to explain without just watching it. It is about a woman who loses her husband and her child in a car accident that happens in the first 10 minutes of the movie, and the entire film is her trying to move on with her life after losing the people who she loves the most. It's a reflection on her relationship, thinking about the authenticity of her relationship and like who her husband was as a person. Her husband was in music, and she also writes music, and she's trying to work to finish one of her husband's pieces that he was working on, and you kind of get an idea as to how much of an impact she had on his music career and got very little recognition for it. And so the movie is really a reflection on grief as a whole, and it is just devastating, but in a way that is very relatable and realistic. Kieslowski gets so much out of his actors just through close-ups and through moments in isolation where there isn't even dialogue, and it's just remarkable. incredible what he pulls off in this movie. The cinematography is mesmerizing. It's one of the most beautifully shot movies I've ever seen. The entire trilogy is amazing, and I would recommend watching all of it. This is probably the most emotionally heartbreaking ones in the trilogy, and it's just amazing, and I love it a lot, and I always look forward to revisit. Up next is another A24 produced film, and this is the movie Room. I remember seeing this for the first time and just being completely and totally distraught watching it because of how heartbreaking and devastating it is. It is a film about a woman who is sexually assaulted and impregnated, and the person who assaulted her has kidnapped her and trapped her in this room where she has given birth to her son and has been forced to raise him in this room where he has never had any exposure to the outside world. And she has to decide whether or not she wants her son to know about the outside world or if she hides it all from him. And it's about the whole process of being trapped in there until they finally escape, and then trying to live life on the other side. And can there ever be any form of normalcy after experiencing something so horrendous? I love this movie. I think it's very hard to watch, but I also think both the performances in it are incredible. Brie Larson, early in her career, delivers a remarkable performance in this. I loved her character. I thought she did an amazing job. The young Jacob Tremblay is fantastic. Their chemistry together is great. He really does a fantastic job playing a child who has absolutely no idea what is occurring around him and is just trying to rationalize the world and the space that he lives in. It's devastating to know that it was based on a true story and that this actually happened, and I think that's what makes the movie all the more hard to watch, but it is amazing. It's so well shot and well directed, and it's a film in A24's catalog I recommend to virtually everyone. And then last up on the list today, I'll talk about a movie I watched recently that devastated me, and that is Greg Araki's Mysterious Skin. I did a full video on this movie, but oh my god, this is one of those movies that just never leaves your mind because of how haunting and horrifying it is. It's also beautiful, tender. There's a lot of great relationship dynamics established in this movie. There's lighthearted comedic moments, but it's mostly devastating. And it's about two young men who, when they were young, were both assaulted by a baseball coach, and one of them realizes that they were assaulted and is trying to live their life and cope with it by embracing their sexuality and essentially taking the power back after being taken advantage of. And the other young man hides it and is convinced that he was abducted by aliens. And it is heartbreaking to watch. Both men experience the trauma in two very different ways, and they eventually come together and share in their trauma. And I think so many people in this world have gone through horrible experiences, and to capture it in a way that showcases two very different ways to overcome something like that and to try to move forward is really remarkable. And I think Greg Araki is really an incredible filmmaker who has a wide array of movies in his catalog of varying genres. But this is just an incredible movie that I would recommend to anyone. It is not an easy watch. It is one that will tear at your heartstrings, but it's a beautiful movie, and I definitely recommend checking it out. So what are some of the saddest films you've ever seen? Let me know in the comments. These are just some, as I said, and let me know if you'd like a third part in this. I've had a really good time putting these lists together. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.